Now that we've started a new file and you've chosen a workspace layout or created your own workspace layout, let's get started with the timeline. We're looking at your timeline now. And the first thing you might notice on the left side of your timeline is you have a layer. You can have as many layers as you want. To add additional layers, you can simply click in this bottom left corner and add unlimited numbers. We've never found a maximum. And they default in a numbering range. However, you can easily double click on a layer. You could call it test, test 1, test 2, sample, whatever it is. If you're creating a character, it may be left arm, right arm, eye, head, whatever is appropriate. You should never leave your layers all generic default, because if you get a long list of layers and you're constantly having to scroll up and down through them, you're going to have to test them to see what is on what layer. Label your layers, be organized, it makes sense. So again, double click. You might call this, let's call this one ball. Let's call this one box. Maybe we'll call this one triangle, and so on. Just make sure they're labeled so that it makes it easy for you to identify. Now, there's nothing on any of these layers, and we can tell that because there are these empty circles in the first frame. This entire timeline panel represents frames, and the numbers above help you count them off, 1 through 5 to 10 to 15 to 20. There's nothing in any of these frames, although in frame number 1 for all layers there is a blank keyframe, and a keyframe can be identified by a little circle inside the frame. Now, let's put something on our first layer. So I didn't actually identify what that one is going to be, so let's simply draw a shape. Okay, and it's defaulting to the colors here in my toolbar, but if I wanted to change those colors, I could simply click on the fill box and come in and change it. If I didn't like the stroke or outline color, again, I could click on the stroke color box and I could, let's go green. And it's a very light color, it's a very thin line, but while it is selected, I can come over and look at that. I'm clicking on stroke in properties and it allows me to adjust it. I could also just click and type a size in here. That would be fine too. Okay, now earlier in the last video, you would have seen that as you click on different tools, different options will appear in the same toolbar. Well, the same accounts for properties. Depending on what you're clicking on will depend on what options appear in the properties panel. So it's a good idea to always have properties open. The properties that, or the options that appear in properties are not going to be the same options that appear on the right side of the toolbar with each tool. So it's good to be able to see both. Okay. Back to the timeline and layers. We did add a piece of art to frame 1 of test 1. Let's go to the next. Okay, and in this case, maybe we'll just do an oval, and very quickly we'll pick another color. And let's go to the next. It's a box. Let's pick a box. And normally you will not be drawing with pre-created shapes, but just to get examples going and get you started, feel free to use them. Okay, so I will do one last shape, and in this case, I am going to actually draw it out with my pen tool because I don't have a pre-created shape for a triangle. And I'm going to select it. Oh, actually, I won't select it. I'll take my bucket, and let's just see. Oh, look at that. So we've got 4 layers with information, visual information in the frame. That's all we have. We don't have anything else yet, but it's a start. And we have all these other layers. I don't think we'll use them. So let's delete them. We'll just select one at a time, and there we go. Okay. Also, if I wanted to organize this in any way, I could create a folder, and whichever layers I wanted to put in that folder, I could, so that later I could simply close it. And of course, I'd probably want to label that folder. So meanwhile, we'll leave them in the folder, but they don't really have any meaning at the moment. If you notice in your timeline at the bottom, you have 24 frames per second. And if you notice to the right in your properties, you have 24 frames per second. And if you remember, when we started the new file, the option for 24 frames per second was there as well. You can change this. And as a matter of fact, to begin with, I'm going to recommend everybody change theirs to 12 frames per second. What that means, frames per second, is every second a certain number of frames will pass. And if we're drawing frame by frame, that would mean 24 drawings per second. That's a lot. For now, we're going to start with 12, and it doesn't mean full stage drawings, but it does mean frames. And depending on what we do with those frames will depend on how much drawing you have to do. Again, over here in properties, though, you see the file size. We stuck with the default file size, which is measured in pixels, and we will do that all year. There will be a few things that we change size of the stage, but most of the time we stick with the default file size of 550 by 400. And of course, you can see in properties the stage color. Always your stage will default to white. However, if you want a different color that holds throughout your entire animation, there's no reason you couldn't just click on stage color, come in and change it. So you can set a stage color other than white, and it will hold throughout your whole animation. If you want different color backgrounds occurring throughout the span of your animations, there will be a different way for you to do that, and that would occur on individual frames up here in the timeline, and we will go through that later. Okay, so we have switched from 24 frames per second to 12. We've set a new stage color. We've created a first keyframe on each layer. So let's first of all just go back and take a quick look here on the show or hide option of the layers. If I click at the top, everything turns off. If I click on individual layers, and so on. Okay, lock, same thing. It's not something you'd actually see down here, but I can lock them all or lock individuals. And again, the outline view. So I'd still see the placement of my art or objects, but I wouldn't see the full color. Okay, we've been through folders, layers, trash. We have nothing to play yet, so we haven't tried these. And we will cover the rest of these as we move on.